So today I have the great pleasure of welcoming an old friend, Gerry Wright, to the Mitchell Center. Gerry has spent more than half a century working to solve pressing problems related to human well-being, the environment, and even international governance. I'm not sure he would define his work in this way, but Gerry has been a pioneer in tackling the problem of sustainable development. That is, balancing the twin goals of human well-being while ensuring the responsible stewardship of the natural world. Gerry is also, as you'll soon discover, a world expert on the life and work of Frederick Law Olmsted. In his presentation today, we have an extraordinary opportunity to see how Olmsted's vision, rooted as it was in the 19th century, is relevant to the challenges we face in the 21st century. Please join me in welcoming Frederick Law Olmsted, who will speak on saving, creating, and sustaining America's natural world. Mr. Olmsted.
Thank you, Dr. Hart. In conversations, I just want to thank Dr. Hart and all the people here of the George Mitchell Sustainability Solutions Center. I read those words and I think, what academic understanding do I have to quite grasp that? But I think I know one thing we talked about. He was interested in my intellect and my emotions and what was my spirit like. And I grasped onto that because I thought, what a way to come to an academic community when I can just talk freely, and it would be sort of a mess that my life is. Let's just begin by, I ended up at the McLean Asylum. Maybe you can help me figure out why did I end up there after I describe some of my life to you. But the deeply serious conviction I had early on in my years that there was something that I wanted to do, but there were circumstances that I had to overcome, which you'll learn about shortly. But I never done this before when I made a presentation. I start with a love affair. And that should get us certainly into a very conflictual discussion. But here's, as I remember it, it was 1845, I was 23 years of age, and I was in New Haven. And I had a trip there that I had taken out to, I'd gone out and I'd been out to sea, trying to trade. It was a sail. And I got back and I recovered in Hartford, which was my home, and then I went down to New Haven where my brother was going to school at Yale. And there I met the most beautiful woman in the world. She was the daughter of the governor. And she was, all the men seemed to be so attracted to her, and I had the chance to talk with her once, and she said, that was a wonderful conversation, Mr. Olmsted. Maybe we could meet again and talk. And I said, oh, certainly. And I did. And the relationship went on, and let me just, I think you'll know the author of this poem, but it shows a certain spirit that I had early on that was grasping me, and I'll tell you something about my family in a moment. By the rude bridge that arched the flood, their flag to April's breeze unfurled. For once, here the embattled farmer stood, and fired the shot heard round the world. Spirit that made these heroes dare to die, and leave their children free. Bid time and nature gently spare this staff we raise to them and thee. Well, something happened in the relationship. I think maybe her father said, where is this man graduated from? And I think she probably told the truth. I graduated from nowhere. And so she said that we couldn't see each other anymore. So she gave me 3 gifts. She She told me, one, that I was a very bright person. And I didn't really believe that. She also told me that I could do something for this nation of ours. And then she gave me a book. She gave me a book by Ralph Waldo Emerson, whose words we just heard, and I just felt the core of it. Oh, that's how we used to date in those times. We'd go home, we'd read some poetry. I remember once we were watching there by the side of the ocean. Ah, it is a beauteous evening, calm and free. The holy time is quiet as the nun, breathless in adoration. And the broad sun is setting in its tranquility, and the gentleness of heaven broods o'er the sea. Listen, the mighty being is awake, and doth with his eternal motion make a sound like thunder everlastingly. Well, it was a long time that I never saw her again. But when my good friend Charlie Brace died, I didn't know how to respond. And I wrote her a 23-page letter. And I told her that she had changed my life. She had given me something within me that made me feel, yes, I can do this. Yes, I can keep going through the difficult time. Now, let's leap ahead to 1898. That's when they said that I couldn't stop in Brookline at the office, and I was going on out to Belmont to the McLean Asylum. And I remember walking up there to the McLean Asylum, and I'd chosen the site, I had put a design. And I looked and I said, damn! They did not follow my vision nor my plans. Well, there are two parts of me right there. To be in love, to be grasped by something that is so beautiful, and then to be so angry that my plans were not followed. My family, my mother died when I was only 4. I have 2 visions of her. One sitting under a tree, a chair, a single tree, and I was playing around her, and picking up leaves, and feeling so much just wonderful. The other was when she was dying, and people were screaming. And I was getting so nervous that I ran out of the house, I ran out into the field, and I fell down, and I cried, and I cried, and I cried. My father remarried a year later to my mother's best friend. My stepmother, I didn't get along with. So they sent me off to school. But my father was a very generous man. And at times, he would take out and he'd simply walk across the fields with me. And then there'd be the times when we would travel to up the Connecticut Valley. Then he took me up to the White Mountains. And then once he took me down to Washington, D.C. So I began to feel the history of our great nation. I had a younger brother, 4 years younger. He became my very best friend, along with Charlie Brace, who I'd mentioned. And we grew up together, and we'd walk sometimes 16 miles to Cheshire outside of Hartford, which was my mother's home, and there we stayed with relatives. And there was my grandfather. Ah, my grandfather, he fought in the Revolutionary War. What a hero to be part of that Revolutionary War that brought freedom to America. time I was lying down under a tree in front of my father's house, and I looked up, and I was just looking at all the branches and how they were going out from the trunk of the tree, and I thought of climbing the tree and which path would I take in my life. My grandfather came up and said, "Fred, what is it that you're doing?" I said, "Grandpa, I'm lying here. I'm thinking, what direction am I going to take in my life?" And he said, "Well, I don't know, but I know I planted this tree, and it's the most important thing I ever did." And I thought, imagine that, my hero grandfather, he planted a tree, and he felt that was the most important thing he'd ever done. Maybe it had something to do why that he and I were together. My schooling, as I said, I had no schooling really. They sent me out to be with ministers, and they were the teachers supposedly. They were individuals that, quite frankly, was one of the reasons maybe that I wasn't really religious, and I felt that my religion was more akin to Wordsworth in the poetry. One minister in particular, the Reverend Jacob, he used to come up, and I used to have fun. I had a good time. I like to enjoy fooling around with the kids, and he'd burst into the room, he'd pick up a broom, and he'd hit me over the shoulder. So there was something about these ministers that I just didn't feel that this was the right way to be someone who was supposed to care for people. Well, my father didn't know exactly what to do with me after I got poison sumac, and the doctor said that I should really not go to school anywhere and just take some time off and just enjoy myself. So I became a wanderer of the woods, and I played in the ponds, and I became interested in all the things that crawled, and it just seemed to me that this was the world that I belonged in. Well, my father began to get quite worried that what was this going to end up in. Well, he took me down to New York, and I got my first job, and that was as a dry goods person in a store on Manhattan. My father owned a dry goods store, and he was well off. As you'll find out, he supported me. But I spent 18 months, but I hated the city. But I wanted to show that I could help to run that store, and they gave me added responsibilities. And I was successful in not only taking care of the customers and selling things, but I was able to take care of the accounting, and I was able to keep the books, and they wanted to keep me on, but I said, no, I've got to get back to the woods and the valleys and the streams of Connecticut. And I did. But I remembered one thing about New York. Those were the schooners that sailed to China. My grandfather was a captain on one of the schooners. So I asked my dad, you think your grandfather, you think you'd get me a position on one? And they did. Well, it's a long story. I'll only tell a very short part of it. But again, to show something of my character and something of an vocation I just didn't want to participate in, because about 4 days out, I was over there on the side of the rail just leaning over. However, I persevered right through that. And I remember that one time that they gave me the wheel of the ship, and I just stood at the wheel, and I then said, how can I stay here all night? And I stayed there all night. And I kept my eyes open, and I'd walk back and forth different ways just to keep myself awake. And I wrote this up in an article. And actually, William James, person interested in that sort of thing, about 40 years later had me do an interview. Because then people knew me, and they said that you had this experience, Mr. Olmsted. Fascinating, fascinating, fascinating. Well, to me, what was fascinating was I persevered. That's what meant something to me. This mystical things, sometimes, I had some difficulty with. Well, my philosophy, as I told my father once, was when I see a nail, Father, I hit it. Other people seem to just walk around looking at that nail. Or maybe researching that nail. Now, I'm not against the scientific approach. Not at all, but I liked what those words I heard. Solutions. That's what I was about all my life, was solutions to problems. And that's where I think we're sitting in a building that's looking, certainly under the name of the senator, who should give us enough inspiration to go out and do every day what we can do in our own way. Now let me move forward as I come back. And now it's the time I'm down there and recovering in Hartford, and then meeting Elizabeth Baldwin. Lizzie. Oh my, Lizzie. Then, what was I going to do? I had another romance. Farming. I became captivated that scientific farming would be an answer for America. That would be something that we would be able to, and we'd be able to become a producer that would be able to take care of the growing populations in our cities. Well, I went up to New York State and I got some training up there in New York State. My father sent me up there. And then Mr. Geddes said, I think you're ready, Fred. Again, I just worked every day, learning as much as I could about farming. So I saw an ad in the paper down near Sachem Head where our family used to vacation at times. And so I said, Dad, would you buy me this farm down there? And he said, certainly, Fred. He was so pleased I was going to do something. So I went out there to that farm at Sachem Head and I worked. And I went out there and cultivated the land, and I planted, and I was ready for the growth in the spring, and there was not much of a growth. And I said, well, this is not good, but I'm going to find some way to continue this effort as how to be a farmer. Fred Kingsbury, he wrote to my brother and said, you know, I visited your brother, Fred, and you know, he's an enthusiast by nature. He starts one project and that seems to fail, and then he goes to another project and that seems to fail, and you and I would be blubbering at the loss of the first, and yet he's moving on to do the third. Well, I then wrote to my father and said, dear father, you know, wrote a letter to Mr. Geddes, and he has a farm on down there in Staten Island. And he's going down, and I think this farm will be the farm. So my generous father, he said, yes, you can get that farm. So I went down and he started the farm. It was good soil. It was a great farm. And I was so excited about not only farming, but of getting other people, other farmers, to get together as a group, so we could work together, so we could develop a council, so all of Staten Island would be able to be a team, and we would be able to feed New York City. Well, my brother visited one weekend, and he was all excited. I said, why is it you're so excited? He said, well, we're going to go to England. And Charlie Brace is going to go with me. I'm sitting there trying to smile and say, well, that's a great thing. That's a great thing. You know, but under my breath, I haven't been to England. You've been to England. You've been to Europe. And I think I'd like to go to England. What was I going to do? Dear Father, I believe that it's very important that I go to England to study farming. Well, my generous father allowed me to go out and to travel to England. And when I got to England, we landed in Liverpool. And I'll never forget that we were out and I was ready to get on the path and get going. We were in a bakery, and the guy who owned the bakery, as we were talking back and forth, he came up to me and said, young man, I think you should go out and see this new park. And we went out, and I said to the boys, I said to brother and Charlie, I said, let's go. Oh, I said, come on, let's go. We got to see this farm. We got to see this new park, they say. So we went out, and I'll never forget it. Walked out, and the man said this used to be a wasteland, basically. But there it was, with paths and streams and rolling hills, and it was for all people. I never lost sight of that. It was in my mind. So with that in my mind, and also with the images of walking through the scenery and going off by myself and sometimes just standing before the beautiful scenery, looking out quietly by myself, I thought, how grasping, how rooted. And I got back to England, New England, and I wrote a book, my first book, Walks and Talks of an American Farmer in England. And one of the places I wrote, Dame Nature is a gentlewoman. No guide's fee will obtain you her favor, nor direct demand. Hardly will she bear question, nor the direct gaze into her beauty. Least of all, will she respond to the true nature of her beauty by the hurried gaze of the traveler. Always, you must patiently and quietly wait upon her. Well, a certain spirit had entered into my being now. I was writing, and I was feeling I could write. The book got some favorable reviews. I went to Charlie Brace and I said, what is it that possibly, I could do? And he said, well, I know the head of the New York Times, and they're looking for someone to go to the South to write. And he said, I'll go. And he said, well, you got to go over and meet Mr. Raymond. I went over and met Mr. Raymond, and I went into his office. I said, Mr. Raymond, Fred Olmsted. He said, yes, I've heard about you. Charlie's book about you. And I heard you have your job. He said, yes, we have a job. And I said, yes, I'd like to take it. He said, well, let's sit down and talk. But we talked, and he hired me. And I took 2 trips and wrote 3 books about my travels in the South. Now, I was not an abolitionist. We had argued back and forth. Charlie Brace was an abolitionist. But I thought that the Negro needed education and job training before we just said, you're free. We had arguments all night long. He brought down some of the abolitionists, that were speaking out through New England. So I went through the South, and I just will never forget. In talking to the people, I tried to understand. The words I thought about later on when I got out there in the West. But let me introduce this word right now. I thought, can we call what is needed communicativeness? That you wanted to understand where the other person was, so that you could think about what their argument was. And you could test your own position with their position. Well, it came to conclude to me that what happened was that it was so clear when I came to a crossroad once in my travels after John. He had tuberculosis, and he'd actually ended up marrying one of the young women on Staten Island that I was interested in. But he said, you were interested in getting your asparagus and your spinach and your pumpkins and everything else into the city to pay any attention to her brother, so I did. And it was Mary. She was bright as anyone I'd met, quick and fast. But I was interested in the farming, and now I was interested in the writing. So 3 books were published. I'll put them right now all together. It happened just before the war. I put them together and called it the Cotton Kingdom. And I understand as I read some literature here, now I don't even know what I told you, I'm now 193 years of age. But as I travel around and have the chance to make some observations, I did a lot of things that are proven I was wrong. So I think that's something that we all must do, no matter how much praise we get for doing something. There are things that we may not be doing right. Well, it happened that John had to go back. He was with me on the second trip to Texas. He wasn't feeling well. I hardly paid that much attention because I still wanted to finish the trip. And then when I got back to Staten Island, John was there with his wife, and he now had 3 kids. And I said, listen, John, would you stay and work on the farm? I've got a publishing opportunity, I believe. And that publishing opportunity was, all I needed was $5,000 to join a publishing firm. So where was I going to get $5,000? Dear Father, my generous Father again supported my work. Well, the publishing business was a success, and then I thought we should get the English writers. So I convinced the head that I should go to England, and I went to England, and we started to get ready to have the English writers contribute. And I got to know people in the literary world in New York. Well, one day I got a letter and it said, "Dear Fred, our partner, the treasurer, has embezzled the money." Damn! A failure, a defeat. I was depressed for a week. What was I going to do? So I went back, and I remember finishing up one of my writings, and a man walked up to me there in an inn along the coast in Connecticut, and he said, "Fred, how you doing?" I said, "Not very well at all, not very well at all." "Well, I'm on the commission for selecting a superintendent for Central Park." "Now, that sounds good. And I think maybe you're the person." "You really think I'm the person?" "Well, I'll get a train tomorrow." So I went down to New York, talked to people, went around and contacted all my literary friends, and I decided that I thought I could get a large number of people who would support me. The word went around that I was an unpractical man. An unpractical man. Well, the votes came in, and the votes were close, but I won by 1 vote, happened to be Washington Irving, a literary man. Then I started to work. And I put everything I had into this because I felt within me that here was something in the center of New York City that could be an answer for years to come. Then I got a letter my brother had gone to Europe with 3 kids. It said, "Dear Fred, it appears I only have a few days left. Please say hello to all the boys, and our friendship has been the most wonderful thing I've known in all my life. And don't let Mary suffer as long as you are alive." I left Fred I left him at the farm. I should have been at the farm. Well, it took a one day a person walked in. I thought I knew him. He said, yes, it's Calvert Vaux. Calvert Vaux! Yes, we met at Mr. Downing's, the great landscape gardener. And we shook hands, and he said to me in the conversation, you know, Fred, I've been doing some thinking, and they're going to hold a competition for a new plan, and I'd like you to join me. And I said, oh, I'm not an artist. I'm the superintendent out there. He said, no, you're an artist. I've watched you. I've been with you from a distance. You're an artist. All right, if you think I'm an artist, let's do it. And we went ahead and we worked every day in the evening, and then on weekends we worked. And again, the competition was close. But our plan of Greensboro won the competition. And there it was. You know, with those two meadows, the long meadow to become known as the sheep meadow, where it looked as if in the middle of the city you could see forever. And then the meadow for the playground, where the kids could play. And then the mall, and the pond, and the ramble with all those rhododendrons and mountain laurel and other bushes that would make it look as if you were out in the wilds of the country. There was a conflict. Green, the person who was the controller, would keep squeezing for more discipline in not spending money. Well, I followed through with my brother's commitment and got married to Mary and had 3 children now. And we were out after about a year with our first child, who was several months, and we were traveling there through the beautiful scenery, which was just beginning to grow in certain parts. In other parts of the rock formations, it was beautiful already. And then we were going to come to a field where I thought that it was going to be possible to be able to see the new plantings that they told me were going to be put in a few days before. But they weren't there. I thought, damn, that green. And I must have hit the horse, and the horse went up, and over went the carriage, and down I went, and I looked and fell on the ground, and there I saw the bone sticking out of my right leg in 3 places. I thought I was going to die. They carried me up to a home. I heard the medical people saying, we've got to amputate. And somebody said, well, he'll die then. And then they said, well, he's going to die anyway. Well, within a week, I was back there and recuperating, and within 3 weeks, they were strapping me to a wagon, taking me through the paths that were being planted. And there was something of a spirit and something of a dynamic that the people who were working felt very, very proud of what we were doing. And then when the ponds had been made and the ice froze, the ponds were frozen. First time weekend there were about 200 people, then there were 500 people, then there were 1,000 people out ice skating in the center of New York City. Well, there were more conflicts than that in our country. The country was going to war. And I wanted to do something, but I couldn't fight. My one leg was 2 inches shorter than the other. I wanted to be the person who was in charge of the training of the freed Negro. Because again, I felt that conviction of what had to be done. Now, I was in a struggle, not knowing what to do. I didn't have that much confidence in Lincoln. I wasn't sure of him. I'd heard all different reports. But then a Reverend Bellows came up and he said, I've got the perfect job for you. He was a Unitarian minister. I want you to become of the United States, head of the United States Sanitary Commission. That's in care of the health in the field hospitals. thought, yes, that I can be of help. Well, I went down to Washington, I met Lincoln for the first time, and quite frankly, I just shook my head. I could hardly understand him, and he just seemed to be aloof. I wasn't sure he was listening, and it wasn't encouraging. Then it was a situation where I did begin, and there was one problem. The Surgeon General, he was some old mess hall doctor, you know, an old man, and he just wasn't getting anything done. So I wrote a letter to the President. And I said, "Dear Mr. President, it's criminal intent to bestow the office of the Attorney General with a self-centered, supercilious, bigoted blockhead, simply because he can move the papers from one side of his desk to the other." Well, I got a knock on my office door, and it was Mr. Bellows, and he said, "Mr. Templeton, the treasurer, and I want to speak with you, Mr. Olmsted." That was not exactly the right thing to do, to write to the President in those words. And I simply looked at him and said, "Am I right? Shouldn't right make for might?" Well, about 3 months later, the old man was gone, and we began to organize. Now I think I better move the story quickly. Somehow I've gotten trying to understand myself as I speak. I think I've gotten some insights, I hope you have, as to what my character is, what my feelings are, what my intellect is, where there's a basic spirit that drives everything, ultimately, for each person in their own way, as I understand it. So, we move on to the battles. And the first battle of Bull Run, I went out and I was so discouraged. There was no organization. I was someone who wanted organization. I wanted someone where people did things together. That we worked together, we communicated together. We were a team together. And we worked hard at doing that. Then there was the idea I had that when McClellan was going down there to take Richmond, and I came up with the idea, how were we going to take care of the wounded? Well, we had some hospital transports. We had boats, we transformed them into hospitals. And we drove them down there to the bay, and there we took care of the wounded as they came out. Just before July 4th, I was so angry because McClellan was there, but why wasn't he going in? And some of the generals said he doesn't have enough troops. So I got one of the boats that was faster, I said, "I'm going up to see the President." Well, I tried to find the President, but I couldn't find him. Probably somebody said, "Olmsted's outside," and said, "Keep that man away from me." So I went and I went back, and we had to bring everybody back. Of course, we all know that that didn't work out, that first siege on Richmond. Then at Gettysburg, in fact, I was with Grant down at Vicksburg. I liked Grant. People said he drank too much. I said, "Oh, wait a minute. He makes good decisions, and I don't think he's drunk when he makes these good decisions, and I'm not sure how often he gets drunk or whether he really does. But what I like is a man who makes a decision, follows through, does it, and gets the job done." And I now think of the wilderness. If it wasn't for Grant leading our troops of the Union through the wilderness, maybe it wouldn't have turned out quite the way it did. But at Gettysburg, before that, I had said, "Mary, I can't go on. I've worn myself out completely." So I got in a hog car after I thought Gettysburg was the turning point. Headed back in a hog car that hadn't been cleaned. There were 10 dead Pennsylvanians in it, and half a dozen wounded South Carolinians in that. It was a terrible war. And I got back, and what was I going to do? I got a letter from Mr. Ryan. He said, "We got a job for you, Olmsted, to run the biggest gold mine in California. And I took that opportunity. And I went out there. And I got to move fast with this story, or everyone will say, wait a minute, we've got an appointment at 4 o'clock, Mr. Olmsted, and we have to be there. And you're a disciplined man, and we're leaving. But is the right time 3:45?
Yep.
Okay, thank you. Because I had looked forward to questions and trying to help understand, not only for Olmsted to understand, but for all of us who are committed to a cause that we feel so passionately about. And we're up against, as was said by Dr. Hart at the beginning, these problems are very, very complicated and complex today, more complicated in my time. But I'm going to go out to California, and once again, when I'm out there, what do I find out? The mayor of Boston was part of the business group, had either swindled Fremont, or Fremont had swindled him, but somebody hadn't told the truth about how much gold was left in the mines. And before I really knew that fact, I had to do one thing, with find water. If we found water, I had the impossible dream, I might say, of developing a civilized community out of the Wild West. And I began to write my longest book, never written, Barbarism versus Civilization. And as I think about myself now, I think that maybe I didn't quite grasp humanity in its fullest. And this may be one of the issues that each person has their own self-centered interest, and I was so convinced of mine that maybe I didn't listen and watch carefully enough as people went after every piece of gold they could find, and they wanted to take it and use it for their own. But when I went to find water, what did I discover? Looking up first at these trees, I wrote to my wife and said they're like heavenly guests that have descended upon us. They're 2,000 years of age. They stand here as monuments to the uncanny magnificence of nature. And when you hold the cone in your hand, it looks like a small egg. And in that small egg are 200 seeds, a flake, to create this incredible, natural monument of the natural world. And so I became so convinced that this property, and then when I walked into the valley, and there, the cliffs rising up, and the falls, El Capitan, Half Dome, all of this must be preserved for all people, for all time. And I wrote a report and I put sentences like, for the pursuit of happiness for all people. And I wrote in several places, the rich are controlling the world, and the poor are not having a chance to get out and to enjoy these magnificent places. We must preserve this in national parks and state parks and parks like New York City, and I included New York City in a list of wonderful works of art that were taking place during the Civil War. There is hope, is it not? During the war, there was a creativity that was bursting forth. So I wrote this report, and I'm pleased to know that people consider it a seed for the national park movement. And as I came back, I created Prospect Park. Just one quote from Prospect Park Report. The purpose of a park is for all people at all time, when they enter, is an escape from the crowded and cramped conditions of the city streets. In other words, it is a sense of enhanced freedom for every person. And I went on and helped build. Calvert Vaux was my partner. My father died and I felt depressed for a long period of time, and then I recovered, and then I thought I should separate from Calvert Vaux and go off on my own. And we created 16 large parks in large cities, and we created hundreds of estate landscape projects. And we went to universities. One of the universities I went to was the University of Maine, 150 years ago this fall. And I walked across and I saw the genius of this place. As I did everywhere I went, I tried to find the genius of a place. Then I was tired. I went up to Boston. I left New York. H.H. Richardson I worked with. Then I was called out to California to do Stanford's work. I argued with him and said, you can't have a New England campus here. It won't last. So Stanford agreed, and we have out there now, we have a southwestern area where it's the plants from the southwest. Then I got the word by the person who was going out there. He came back and he said, well, now Mr. Stanford says we don't have to continue to supervise because his wife's brother will do the supervision. I immediately wrote him a note, Mr. Stanford, I am out. Because there's a responsibility when you start the project, you want to follow through to ensure that there's sustainability. Because we know that without the sustainability, in fact, the fact that we have so many things that have been destroyed by those who did not follow what Olmsted had hoped, a greater civilization, but they're still the self-centered people who are looking for the gold in 1,000 ways. And our parks, as I go across, they need help. They need everyone's help. Well, Charlie Brace died, and that's when I wrote the 23-page letter to Elizabeth Baldwin. And then it came to the point that I did go, well, I had another project. That was a small one. I'm sarcastic at the moment. It was Biltmore. And down there at Biltmore, you know, you'd be very interested. I just had an opportunity of meeting with the director of forestry. And down there at Biltmore, Mr. Vanderbilt said to me, George, the youngest brother, said, I have 10,000 acres. Make me a park. I said, Mr. Vanderbilt, I only need 200. But I have an idea for the rest. The rest is that we'll have the first scientific school of forestry in America. And I again identified the right person, Gifford Pinchot. And he came down and he became the father of American forestry. Then there was another work that somebody stopped by the office and Mr. Olmsted, they want you out in Chicago to do the Chicago World's Fair, the Columbia World's Exposition. And I said to him, I don't do fairs. And he said, well, wait a minute, this is what this is going to be about. And all of a sudden I remember, I'd been out there. I remember the lake. I remember Michigan. I remember the possibilities. So I did go out. And I remember we created a lagoon. And I said to Mr. Burnham, when he got all excited, oh, just think of the number of motorboats we can get to go around the island, Mr. And I said, no motorboats. Electric boats. I want it quiet. I want people to feel. And then I was tired and my ears were aching and I was just tired and I went here and I went there. I was going as many places as I could. And then one day I got to the point that I realized I had to take a break and so they said, go to England. So I went to England and there in England it was several things happened that one was that I just shake because I couldn't believe that when I asked Mary, what is it, Mary? And she told me that Calvert Vaux is dead. No, he can't be dead. I left him, and I know he still tried to do his work in New York, but he didn't. He didn't get the work, and I shouldn't have, like my brother, I shouldn't have left him behind. Well, how did he die? They say he committed suicide. Suicide? No! No, Calvert, no! And they took me home. And they didn't stop in Boston. They took me up to Deer Isle. They built a place for me. Yes, and maybe I did hit the horse, and maybe I did hit the keeper of the horse. And they took me back, and they took me not to my home again, but out to McLean. There I said, damn, I can still fix the problems here. I can work here, but people weren't listening to me. I had a special cottage. It was called Hope House, and I stayed out there at McLean for 5 years. But it seemed to me that what could be done? Damn! They didn't follow my vision or my plan. But yet, I remember Yosemite, and I remember Central Park, and I remember the words of the poet. I have felt a presence that disturbs me with the joy of elevated thoughts, a sense sublime of something far more deeply interfused. The broad sky and the blue sea. And therefore I am still a lover of the meadows and the fields and the pastures and the forests and the trees and all that we behold on this green earth. Yes.
So, Mr. Olmsted, I'd be interested in hearing your side of difficulties you've had with the board, with Bellows, and the others. I know they hired you to set up the structure, organize all the divisions, but somehow there was a falling out, a parting of the ways, where they weren't letting you do what you needed or wanted to do, and I'm wondering if you can share any of that.
Let me speak as Gerry.
Okay.
No, because I think the question is well-founded, and probably you've read that in different places. I think it's an excellent question to try to understand the balance of someone who has such personally strong ideas. Because to other people, the Reverend Bellows called him a pope, a dictatorial pope. Not directly to Olmsted, but the comment of Templeton Strong, who was the treasurer, he said, Mr. Olmsted is the most unique specimen of humanity I have ever laid my eyes on. He works all night, and goes to bed at 4, wakes up at 10, after sleeping on the couch, and has a glass of black coffee and pickles for breakfast. So, obviously a unique individual. But his desire was to bring together and organize. And the board, especially Bellows, was the minister who wanted to please everybody. So I think with Olmsted, he was saying, you're right, Mr. Olmsted. To the other person, he says, well, we're going to let you do this. And there's no question, but the triggering point is difficult to know exactly what it was. But I think in part, he was worn out and just exhausted. And his talks with Grant, to me, were rational discussions in which there was a mutual. So I would say that there was a difficulty. It's summarized by some people. He had difficulty working with boards, and that's probably a key statement. I mean, when you have a person with such convictions on that. Yes.
So why was he hired for the University of Maine? Do you know?
Why was he hired?
To do work here. What was his
Well,
purpose?
his reputation was a national reputation. So he was invited to more places than he could possibly go. And when he came to Maine, and this needs more research, and some people I hope here will find out if the plans are in the archives here. And I'm going to go back because I believe the plans, some of the plans are at the National Homestead site in Brookline. But he came here because I think he was deeply concerned about these new colleges, landmark colleges, right?
Yeah.
And land-grant colleges, and he was interested in one of the things they had some reservation about. He wanted some sort of training, some military training, because he'd experienced that America wasn't ready to fight. So this was one of the issues that I think there might have been some disagreement here. But the question, why invited, I think is clear that he was invited because of his reputation. I mean, he's invited to hundreds of private estates across the country.
And made plans.
And made plans. Oh, yes. Yeah, there's something like 6,000 plans.
Was there a pattern of the plans? Did they repeat, or were they unique?
Every place Olmsted went, his approach was, what is the genius of this place? You know, what is it that's unique about this particular place? And so therefore, repetition is not found. I mean, you go to any of the big parks and they're all different. It's like he had a vision for the Columbia World's Exposition. He saw Lake Michigan. So he had two design styles. I mean, one was the pastoral, the open field, and the other was the picturesque, the ramble. And then, at times, you had the sublime. And here's where the spirit comes in. Here's where the spiritual comes in. And this is my interpretation, but I think it's very clear that there's something in his writing that shows that he was rooted with a patriotic spirit and the relationship with his mother for 4 years and the relationship with Elizabeth Baldwin, that idealistic relationship it had. I mean, it leads toward all the qualities are there for somebody to be driven, you know, to execute the things that he did. And anybody with other thoughts on his psychological condition? No, I tried this was it was because what happened here this afternoon was that I usually have a program that has 6 acts. I'm not an actor. I just do what I feel within myself, and people have responded, and therefore I keep doing it and trying to help out, trying to motivate, trying to inspire, whatever the situation is. But it's usually right there, and everybody is there says, "What's this 6 act, 6 scenes?" But they have a program. All I have to do is make sure I follow that program. And then they have something to take home, and they can say, "Gee, here are the dates. See, you guys don't have any dates, so this is why I use the word mess." And as soon as I said the word mess, I thought, "Geez, what are these people thinking today?" And I found myself caught up, you know, trying to use more descriptions. But so I think it's fascinating for me because our society today, well, yes,
I also wanted to tell people that I brought a drawing, and I have it in the other room, that he is of an estate here in Bangor that we're trying to bring back. And it was interesting because I looked at it for the first time and noticed he had line sights to a cabin that I never even noticed. Just now did I look at the designs closer, having been on that landscape and still not seeing what he was seeing. So it's like when you said about that, he was seeing things. He was seeing cabins and making sure that the building had a line to vision that we didn't even, that we threw another house, I think, in the middle of that now.
And the other thing is that this design is a 1913 design, and so therefore it's Olmsted died on the 28th of August in 1903. But this is his son, Rick, and he browbeat Rick to be a landscape architect, literally. And Rick turned out to be with as much work. He went out to the West Coast and named 55 places for state parks. He did the work in Baltimore, and when he was born on the 24th of 1870, just an interesting fact about Olmsted Authority, two of his children had died, two boys. And so his wife said, well, call him Henry, and he didn't care. He just called him Boy. So he was Henry. But at age 4, Olmsted changed his name to Frederick Law Olmsted Jr. So one more insight, right? As the
So I'm mindful of the time. Anybody who can hang around longer, please do so. I actually have for Gerry a signed copy of Senator Mitchell's memoir, The Negotiator, which has a lot of wonderful stories that actually parallel some that have to do with the arc of Olmsted's life. So let's thank Gerry again.